on being a fence rider. I feel like this video is supposed to be on a channel that's dedicated to being religious, connected to religion, believing that and being convinced that religion does have a purpose and that it can assist a person in their life. It can make an individual a better being. It can guide them to the source of this entire universe and to be connected to that wisdom, that knowledge, that love in its highest, utmost form. To be connected to the one that has that is extremely powerful and extremely beneficial. So I see this channel dedicated to an individual that can align with what I just said. And at the same time, they are a human being. And at the same time, they have their struggles. And at the same time, they have their finding of balance. Finding of balance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired our Prophet Muhammad to say, كل بني آدم خطاء وخير الخطائين التوابون. And I may be saying the harakat or the Arab may be a little bit off. But the point is, all of you, every one of you is, every human being, all of the children of Adam are those who sin. And the best of those who sin are those who repent. Now, there are some who may watch this that have come to the point in their life where they say, well, there is no sin. There's nothing right. There's nothing wrong. And I'm going to make a video that I will be posting very soon on that subject to change the perspective of the word sin, to bring more awareness to the word worship. But in essence, sin is divine misalignment. Sin is what disconnects you, what keeps you from connecting fully, properly, what hinders you from your purpose of being, and that is to worship, and that is to connect and surrender to the one that brought this universe into existence. So how can I say this and believe this and still admit to being what my father would call, or others would call, a fence rider, meaning someone who is not fully committing, someone who wants to have their feet in the water, or 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the sand? It sounds like a very derogatory statement, but hasn't that always been the way of those who must explore, who believe in the benefits that are within the so-called metaphorical box? And yet they also want to see what's outside of the box. Boxes don't have to be tiny. Boxes don't have to be bad things. It's like a glass. You need a glass, right? We all use a glass. Maybe some of us go to a stream and we take our hand and we go and we drink the water. But ultimately, if you have a journey and you need provision, you're going to need a container. You're going to need something that is going to allow you to hold that water or to hold that food. You may need a bag to contain the items that are necessary for you to properly embark in this world. So don't think of the word box as in and of itself a limitation. And limitations in and of themselves are not bad. I must limit my consumption of social media if I want to be a productive individual. I must limit the amount of food that I eat that is containing sugars or processed foods if I would like to be a healthy person. I must limit myself in, I'm trying to think of another example. Limitations are not in and of themselves bad. Extreme limitations are, like anything else, harmful. But moderate limitations are needed to excel in this world. So I see that something in me has always been different from those around me. I'm not saying every person's different. Every person must be. We each have our own genetic coding. We each have DNA that is completely different. Even our voices. Now, when I call my bank, which by the way, I recommend Charles Schwab to everyone, especially if you're a traveler, no ATM fees. Every time I call Charles Schwab, for example, they keep reminding me that I haven't activated my voice recognition because Hasna's voice is a unique voice. It's like a fingerprint. It's a voice print. And every single one of you as well. That in and of itself is an evidence that we are unique and that we are individual. Nevertheless, there are some times when you have certain individuals that are in their environment, there's certain aspects of them that are different. One of the things that I found was I had a desire for a level of connection, for a level of openness that I don't know if most people around me desired. Even when it came to wanting to uncover the truth of different matters, I can think of many situations where my classmates just accepted information, or they experienced something but they didn't ask questions about it. They didn't. I can think of very specific situations, and I would be the one to say, do you think that, or do you feel that, or did you notice that? And some would say those questions could have even been inappropriate, but it was for the purpose of knowledge. It was for the purpose of wanting to know, okay, am I the only one? And the fact that I was willing to ask those questions that others were not, in some way made me different, even if everyone was feeling the same. But the fact that I chose to go further, to go deeper, that I had a desire to want to know. So, I'm gonna unplug this. And like I said, everyone's different in their own way, but that was my way that I was different, or that I am different. And so with that, it's never been enough for me to just accept what people tell me. It's never been enough for me to just accept my own level of, I was going to say the word mediocrity, but I mean, I do have mediocrity, but that's not the point I'm making. Let me be present for a moment. It's not enough for me to be given something that I know is good for me and to go deeper into that goodness and not have known other than that. It's not enough for me to take something of myself that may be an insecurity and then cover that, ironically, in faith. I think there's a lot of choices that are made and that I have made that could have been connected to an unhealthy form of limitation, an unhealthy form of insecurity, an unhealthy level of not fully understanding my capabilities and my power. And why I have to be careful is because people love to take your words and make them a part of their agenda. People will not necessarily desire to really understand what is it that this person is saying. When I've spoken to people about the impact of my Orthodox religious upbringing, I'm very careful who I speak to because most people already have a bias toward religion. And I don't see religion as a bad thing. I see religion and I see divine guidance as always, divine guidance is always good. It always has goodness in it. But when it comes to religion, I see that depending on how a person carries that out or lives that, it can be positive and it can be negative, like everything else. We all have to admit that religion has been touched by man. It has been touched by people. Divine guidance in and of itself has not. The Quran has not. The pure example of Prophet Muhammad was not tainted in that manner. He made his own mistakes as well that were even mentioned in the Quran. Very light, slight mistakes, but he made mistakes. Nevertheless, the purity of his behavior and his intention and his actions inspired a complete transformation of the world. But my point, because as I'm going on different tangents, my point is that people have touched religion, and so with that humanity comes levels of extremism. With that humanity comes cherry picking. Ooh, we have this focus, and so we want to focus on these narrations. And then there's certain narrations that you just never hear. Never, ever. And I was having this discussion, for example, with a friend of mine, and I was mentioning to her that within certain groups, you'll never hear about the woman who was defending Prophet Muhammad. You may hear a lot of emphasis on the safety of the woman and her not traveling, for example, by herself. You may hear about how important it is for her to honor her husband, which if a husband is in alignment with his duties, yes, he definitely should be honored. And similarly, the woman should also be honored, but it's different kinds of honoring based on what they're doing. Nevertheless, there is that respect, there is that love, there is that adoration, there is that honor. But in certain groups, you'll never hear them talk about the example of the woman who was the Sahabiya who was in the military, who left and right everywhere the Prophet looked, he saw her defending a woman with a sword. And before people who maybe don't know better start, oh yeah, we knew Islam was spread by the sword. Excuse me. If you were being attacked for many years, and then you leave to go to a place of peace, and you're still being attacked, and attacking is not, oh, you who they call Prophet Muhammad, you've been a bad boy. Come gently over here, and we would like to put you away for a little bit in a very comfortable situation where you will no longer be able to teach that God is one, and that you should be kind to the orphans, and that you should be just to women, and that women have their own property and their own rights and don't have to take the name of a man because they're not property, etc., etc. That's not what was happening. They were out for blood. They were out to kill Prophet Muhammad and his followers. So when there are certain verses that are mentioned out of context, such as وَقْتُلُوهُمْ حَيْثُ ثَقِفْتُمُوهُمْ, and kill them wherever you find them, fight them, kill them wherever you find them, this was a verse of defense by people who were under attack, who were being starved, who were being tortured. And yet when we watch movies and there's the bad guys And then there's the good guy, and the bad guys are trying to kill the good guys. Everybody is generally very pleased when the bad guys are killed, when they are defeated. And if that includes death, usually, if the movie is done the right way, you empathize. You empathize with the main character. What is that called? The protagonist? The protagonist. But somehow, we are regurgitating what we're told in the media and what we've been indoctrinated with, because many of us are living in a, how do I say, in a civilization that has inherited a intrinsic bias, because there was a great Islamic empire that other forces such as Europe and later on America were afraid of and wanted to defeat, and they dismantled that power. So we don't hear about that. We don't hear about anything from a level of, first of all, we don't hear about it, and then when we do, it's going to be in a negative light. Because if your nation, aka the USA, for example, wants to go into a country and knows, within the next 10 years, we need to steal your oil. Within the next 10 years, we need these resources so we can maintain our way of life and our power. So we know we have to create a war, and then we have to slaughter lots of people. And those people are going to be Muslim. You're telling me they're not going to have planted seeds beforehand to make that acceptable, to make people see that blood is cheap? So I'm on a tangent. What I see is that I'm an explorer. I'm someone who likes to experiment, and part of my exploration is through not only books or videos, but people and conversations and going deep. That's a part of who I am. And I see that I'm somewhat done with the expectations of others. I'm done. There may be some percentage that's not done, but I really feel like I'm done. It's hard for a person to understand that when you're done in one way, how it's not this radical, I completely don't want anything to do with people who are not of the same faith or people who are. It's basically becoming the term, you become a fence rider. You become someone who is exploring and learning and using what benefits you and experimenting with what you thought maybe wasn't going to benefit you, but you need to see for yourself. You need to feel for yourself. And I feel like my biggest issue in the world we're living in today, especially with those who are much younger, we're talking about like the early teens and the adolescents, they're exposed to everything that's not talked about, except in the way of this is wrong, except in the way of aib, shameful, but who's really empathizing with those who don't attend the masjid, with those who they just don't see why something from 1400 years ago applies to their life? From someone who their parents themselves have never studied. So I feel like I grew up different in that I had parents that chose. Yesterday after the gym, I ended up going to this place nearby called Bali Soul. And I decided, instead of waiting until later, like having fruit in the morning and then having a heavy meal later on and then being, eating heavy late at night, I said, why don't I just, before noon, have my heavier meal? And I could see how that might work for me, to be honest, because I digest kind of slow anyway. So I feel like I wasn't really hungry until nighttime, and I could have had some fruit. I had something sweet, but I could have just had some fruit. So I need to plan better for that. The point is, went to Bali Soul, ended up speaking with a man who was very friendly. He comes in, I was the only one there. Hi, how are you doing? Good morning. Very cheerful. So, being this person who is a bit more open than maybe I was. Well, actually, no. Just being open about being open, not hiding the fact that I'm open. I said to him, well, you seem friendly. Why don't you just come sit down here? And we had a really good conversation. He was Persian, Iranian background, born and raised in Sweden, from parents who were not practicing at all and actually had a dislike for religion, as one can understand when you're in a regime that can be somewhat oppressive. And or just simply that you don't want people telling you what to do, and you're in a country that tells you this is what you have to do. Whatever the case may be, that's how he grew up. And he said he had very bad experiences with Muslims. Very bad. When he asked a question one time in a group about, with another person, with one person he's speaking with, he said, well, in our country, Muhammad would have been considered a pedophile. Out of the blue, he gets smacked or gets punched. I mean, he's someone who apparently did work out and take care of himself, so he didn't just run away. He fought back, so there was a fight. But that was the level of interaction that stood out for him when just expressing a view that, yeah, I can understand. For those who have no idea, and I said to him, I said, most people have not studied the life of Prophet Muhammad. They haven't studied it. Most people have no idea that this man was a virgin and he had not even been with a woman until he was married. That woman asked for his marriage, wanted to marry him based on his honesty, his uprightness, his way. That woman was 15 years older than him. And in a country where, in a civilization where it was normal for men to have many, many, many wives and slave girls and all of that, he was just with her until she died. People don't know that. People don't know that in most of the world, girls were getting married younger. People don't know that he only married one woman who was 9 years old. And some say she was older. Some say that's not even correct. But the point is, let's just say she was. Women lived shorter lives. People lived shorter lives. People got their periods. I mean, I've had classmates that had their period at 9. So the way maturity and womanhood was looked at was a bit different. But if he was someone who has such a strong desire for the young, then, I mean, he could have had many, many, many young wives. He could have had many wives or women just in general before he was married the first time. He could have. But he was not a lustful person in that manner. He said he loved women, but he wasn't deep in the hedonism and sexual exploration in that manner that he needed to do that. All of his wives after Khadijah died were mostly older women, or if they weren't older, they were widowed and they had children. Aisha, coincidentally, is the top female scholar in the history of Islam. She was a blessing. That marriage to Aisha was a blessing to us. She was young, she was bright, she was intelligent. There was no signs that this woman, our mother, we call her one of our mothers, peace and blessings be upon her, radiallahu anha, was traumatized, was... Anyway, I have to go. But I just got a message. But the point is, I'm so glad I invited him over. I'm so glad. Traditionally, that would be considered forward. I lived in environments where men and women did not communicate at all. And that had its purpose in that place, in that environment. It was conducive for that environment. I 100% have no issue with how that was set up in that time, where I was, in the country that I was in. But what I see is that I don't fit that mold, and I don't see that at this stage that it benefits me to fit that. I see that I sat down with this person. I invited him over. When I saw him, it was nothing of, he looks good, let me bring him over. No, it was a friendly energy. He was going to sit the only person over by himself in a restaurant, and I decided to call him over. He did. Coincidentally had a Islamic background, in the sense that he came from a country that was Muslim but was not raised in one, had only bad experiences with Muslims. And at the end of that, he said that I was the most intelligent, intellectual, like this was the best experience that he ever had with a Muslim. And we talked about all different subjects, because he asked me, I hope you don't mind, and he asked me about the hijab. And so I started talking to him about different angles, different aspects of how to look and how to approach the subject of men and women, and what year we're in versus how many years ago. And he asked, is it really in the Quran? And I addressed that issue of what is said in the Quran, and how you have to admit there is a big difference in how a man, because I said to him, you are attracted to women, right? Okay. You do have sexual desires, right? I want to know so we can be clear. Okay. So you tell me, when you see a woman who's completely covered in loose flowing clothes compared to a woman who is wearing very fitted yoga pants, and you see everything, what's the difference? And he was honest. He was honest that even comparing that to a woman completely naked, there's a difference. Like, completely naked is like, okay, everything's there, I see it. Completely covered, it's kind of like, I don't really, nothing to do with that. But when it's that kind of dressed, but I see everything, or I see a lot, that's something very enticing. And it's very interesting, because Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that in the end of times, people would, or women would dress, but they would be naked. They would be wearing clothes, but it would be like they're naked, because you can see everything. Either it's sheer, or it's tight, or you see everything. So there's no real mystery. And the point is that when you have people that don't necessarily believe in a creator, without any anthropomorphic qualities, that was before all of this universe existed, and that gives divine guidance, if people don't believe in that, then naturally there's no concept really of what is right and what is wrong. Because if a human being is coming up with the idea of right and wrong, then, well, I'm a human being too, so why should I listen to you? I can decide for myself. I can do what I will. Do what thou wilt, like Aleister Crowley said. So it doesn't make sense when people who are religious talk to people who are coming from a different background, or people who are convinced of divine guidance are coming from one background and speaking to people who are in a completely different mindset, and talking to them as if they're on the same mindset. Like, you have to first understand where a person's coming from. You have to first understand where, this is in every situation. And so whether you see someone who, like in my case, there were certain things that people in my community and circles noticed, or my mother, or whoever it may be, noticed that was different. Oh, she's covered a little bit different now. Oh, her arm is out here. Oh, she's performing. Oh, she's. Why? You're approaching a person, you approach, or they would approach me, or people have approached me in a manner as if I'm the exact same person that they knew before. When really, you need to understand where the person is coming from and what they're thinking of and what is in their mindset at this point before you start talking about what are the signs of that mindset. It doesn't really make any sense. There's core issues that either the person wants to align with or they don't. It's kind of that simple. And so you can have a discussion with them and understand where they're coming from. And the same thing with me. Like, a person is welcome to have a discussion with me and understand where I'm coming from. But at the end of the day, sometimes it's just being human. There's no excuses. No, it's just we're all on our journey. We're all in our process. And some of us are strong in some areas and some of us are weak in some areas. And so I rarely see people who are speaking and presenting both sides of themselves, where they really believe in Islam and they really are convinced of the divine guidance, and they're also exploring other areas, seeing the correlations, and admitting even aspects of their own weaknesses, or admitting, oh yeah, I made a mistake in this area, and or this is why this isn't good to do, and I've experienced that for myself. It's usually I'm righteous and mashallah, which is a good thing, and I'm in alignment with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what the creator wants, the divine guidance, and I'm going to share that, but not bringing the personal aspect too much into it of who they are as a human being. So then it gets into a kind of pedestal thing where I knew when I left Yemen that if I wanted to be on that pedestal, that I could have. If I wanted to dress the dress and talk the talk and walk the walk and, you know, have my durus, have my classes, I was very aware that I had the capability to do that. But it wasn't authentic because that's not all who I am. And I didn't want the other aspects of me to be strangled by giving what communities think they need. So it's interesting, it's interesting figuring this all out. And maybe it's a luxury to even be able to think about this. And yeah, in some way, I chose this life. I chose this life based on my exposures, based on what I heard growing up. And so out of all my friends, I'm the one who's living abroad. I'm the one who's living out of the States. And now I have another friend who she's left recently, and she's studying Arabic, and her goal is to know the Quran and to study the Quran. So there must be something different in that I'm the only one from my friends, from those who I grew up with, who is living this life. And my purpose is to share. And if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, please feel free to leave a comment, to message me. And I believe that this life we're meant to progress, to experience progress, and to help one another. All of us have the capability to help one another. All of us have something that we can share, that we can impart. And I'm weak in some areas, and you may be strong in certain areas. So show me your strength. Inspire me with your strength, with your applications, with your convictions. Inspire me with what you're producing, with what you're bringing forth. Peace and blessings.